Hi everyone, it's Andrea here. I've had a few requests for bread making. I never actually thought I'd be asked how I make my bread, but it seems to be quite popular at the moment. There seems to be quite a few people with a load of flour and yeast in their cupboards for some reason. So I thought I'd just walk you through a quick white bread loaf, and it's quite a simple basic recipe, but it's great, and you can adapt that later on once you've mastered it. But I think if you can master a really good white loaf, you'll be chuffed to bits. It uses 700 grams of strong bread flour, so strong white flour, 10 grams of salt, 7 grams of dried yeast, 5 grams of sugar, 400 ml of tepid water, and a knob of lard. Now, if you haven't got lard, you can use butter, you can use margarine, or you can use spread, whatever you've got, but just a knob of fat to rub into the flour. The reason we do that is so that it keeps the loaf a bit moist, and it just gives it a better texture. With the water, I tend to weigh mine out rather than measure it out, because you get a better, more accurate amount, and the water to flour ratio is really important. So if you can weigh it out, make sure you've got 400 ml of water ready to put into the flour. Now with the sugar, you need to dissolve that, so the water needs to be 43 degrees when you put the yeast in. If it's any hotter, it will kill the yeast. You can go down to about 36 degrees centigrade or Celsius, whatever it is. But I tend to put it in a little bit warmer so that the sugar dissolves. And then once it's down to 43 degrees, then I sprinkle the yeast on top. So with that, we sprinkle the yeast on the top, let it go frothy. It will clump up a little bit, but just get the tip of a spoon or a knife or something and just break the little bubbles, and then they'll all disperse. They kind of sink to the bottom, and when they start sinking, they start bubbling up and rising, and it makes a bit of a froth, and you'll see that in the video in a second. So once you've got the yeast ready, mix the salt into the flour, mix it really well, then rub in the fat, and then make sure that with the fat it doesn't have to be rubbed in that well, but just rub it in as well as you possibly can do. So you'll see here, this is the loaf I've made, mixing the water in the right temperature, sprinkling the yeast on, letting it settle. When it's like that, that's when you mix it in. Quickly put the salt in, rub the fat in, and then once you've done that, it doesn't have to be rubbed in that well, mix the water in and use the back of a spoon or the handle of a spoon, because it will mix it in better. Just keep mixing it until it comes to a dough. Once it's come to a dough, then you need to just sort of keep mixing it until it gets a nice consistency for you to handle, and then tip it onto a work surface. What I tend to do is just put it straight onto the work surface. I never ever put extra flour on, because you have this temptation to put more and more flour in, and it just alters the structure of the dough. So just trust me on this, it will work. You just have to just keep working it on the surface, and you'll see that I use a technique rather than kneading, and the technique I use is what I call a pull and push motion and flip. So it's pull with your left hand back, push with your right hand forward, and then with your right hand flip it over. And what you're doing is you're actually trapping air in there. So you need to be doing this for 10 minutes, so put a timer on. So pull with your left, push with your right, and flip it over, and keep doing that for 10 minutes. The structure of the dough changes quite a lot and becomes more elastic, and then once it's ready, you put it into a bowl. Now I just lightly dust it, and then any edges of or any leftover flour, I just use that to shape the dough into a ball. Once the dough is ready to leave to rise, put it in the bowl, which has been previously dusted with flour, and cover with a bit of cling film. Yes, sorry, it is cling film, but that's what I use. I've tried all these silicone things, they don't work. So a bit of cling film over the top, and you just leave it in the bowl for about an hour, somewhere warm. It may take longer, but it needs to have double size or double the size. You'll see in a second that it's been proving for an hour, and then we'll just tip it out onto the work surface once it's proved. But you do need to leave it for a good hour, maybe an hour and a half, maybe two, depending on the temperature. There, it's risen. You just ease it off with a spatula. Let the weight of the dough drop out of the the bowl. Don't force it out, so just let it nicely roll out of the bowl and just ease it with the spatula. And you can see I haven't used a lot of flour, just a tiny bit of flour, and then we're going to flatten it. Now you just have to flatten it to get all the air out. So we're flattening it nicely. You can flatten it as flat as you like, but that's kind of how I do it. Now normally I would prepare the pan before, so greasing the pan. If you haven't got a pan this size, use a 2-pound pan and have a mushroom loaf. It's quite effective how it comes out, or put it in a Dutch oven. But whatever you do, make sure that you've really well greased it, because otherwise it won't come out. So I'm going to be doing a thing what I call rolling and flattening, just to shape the dough. And make sure that the dough has the seam at the bottom, because otherwise you're going to have a nasty crack on the top. So you always want a crack on the bottom of the seam on the bottom of the loaf. So I'm going to roll it, flatten it, roll it, and shape it into the tin. One thing I forgot to say is put your oven on to about 220, 230 degrees, depending on whether you've got a fan or a normal oven. 220 for a fan oven. Put that on now, so that it's heating up whilst you're shaping the dough and letting it prove. And 10 minutes before you're ready to put the dough in, I would put a pan of hot water, which you'll see in a second, so that there's boiling water at the bottom. You just get a better crust. Here I'm flattening the bread out into the corners so that everything is nicely shaped. Bit of flour on top, so when you put the cling film on, it doesn't stick to it. If you don't, the cling film will stick, and then you'll break the surface of it and it will crack. Cheesy grin. Hot water there, that's where the hot water's going in 10 minutes before, and then let it come back up to temperature to 230. Put your loaf in, and the water at the bottom will be really boiling and bubbling at the bottom. So leave that in there for about 30 to 40 minutes. Mine took about 35 minutes. And take it out of the oven, and you will see you will have the most delicious white loaf. It might look a bit overcooked, but believe you me, it's not. So there's the loaf, and just leave it to cool. Don't get tempted to cut it before it's cooled down properly, because it just drags and it looks awful. So what you need to do is make sure that you just let it cool before you use it, and I hope you like it.